Welcome to my presentation on Understandings and Formation of Crit Culture. This is an introspective analysis of your experiences with art, and my name is Jennifer Wester. I am presenting this today because I have found that it's really necessary to form better community around our experiences with art. It's good for artists, it's good for viewers, and I hope you'll understand why I say that by the end of this presentation. Why am I focused so much on crit culture? Well, because I see a lot of people interpreting the word crit to mean criticism versus critical analysis. And what that means is that we miss all of the important insights that artists cannot get without a community sharing what their experiences are with a work. And when we think those experiences will be all about the negative, which is criticism, we don't share. We're embarrassed for the artist if we want to say something negative and we feel like we will hurt them. And we, as the artists, are embarrassed to have anything negative said about our work. So what I really want to do is reframe the idea of crit and kind of banish from our minds this criticism thing that we've started to interpret it as, and instead replace it with critical analysis, and specifically critical analysis of the viewer's internal experience with the work. So there is certainly a place for a critical analysis of the craft of a work, where you might have a hierarchy in those speaking to you about the particular materials used or their ability to be preserved, archival quality things. And while that's all fine and good, that's really in the place of a setting like a course where you're addressing a master and they're going to tell you how the work could be improved upon. And again, when we're saying critical analysis here, instead of putting in this hierarchy, like with criticism, what we're wanting to do is say, no, let's critically analyze the things that as viewers we are inherently expert in and that the artist is inherently in need of, which is our personal experiences with the artist's work. These personal insights are really, really valuable. Why? Because art is at the end of the day a way of communicating, and an artist can only understand what they are really communicating out, how that translation is happening from their work to the viewer, if viewers are able to speak to the artist and let them know what their experience is. Not whether they like it, not whether they don't like it, not what else the artist could have done, but very specifically, what is your experience right now with this work? So let's walk through the guidelines that I've laid out. I've written a bit of a crit culture manifesto because I really want people to embrace this form of artist community and viewership community. Crits are often able to be completely open to the public, and so long as these simple guidelines are fulfilled, you really have a balance between the benefit of the viewer, whether they be just a viewer or another artist, and the artist, who's also going to gain a lot from that experience, rather than asking either one to volunteer their time for only the benefit of the other. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read the manifesto. That way I don't get too long with what I'm saying here. I wrote this manifesto having reflected for years on the issues around insecurities and ways that we inhibit ourselves with discussing artwork. You've probably noticed that when you walk into galleries or museums, you could hear a pin drop. And back a few years ago, I actually thought that effect was only seen when people didn't come from an art background and weren't artists. And I was fortunate to have that impression because whenever I was going to school for art in my undergrad, there was a very strict structure to how crits were held, and it protects the speaker as well as the artist. And that is what I realized was missing even in the art communities when I got down here to Dallas. And I'm originally from Dallas, so obviously this broke my heart. I really wanted to find a way to bring this kind of mutually beneficial culture around crit here locally for the growth and benefit of everyone in the art scene. So without further ado, my manifesto for the elevation of a working critical discussion in art. So I've actually put this in a document And I will release this document because I would love everyone to potentially sign on to it and try to implement these principles in your own process with your art. But this document seeks to establish, for the purpose of artists and viewers, a working crit culture in and around Dallas, Texas, definitely including Mesquite. Crit, from my perspective here forward, is defined as a communal exploration of an object's phenomenon, a performance's compelled visual and psychological experiences, and with a prerequisite understanding that, of course, each such experience is going to be in a multitude and variable and affected by lots of different factors. So basically, each viewer will be having their own experience with a piece of art because each of us is different. We come with a different background of information and understandings and just visual memory that's all going to play into how we see a piece of work. So again, this crit culture is as viewers so that we can tease forward our observations and understandings of our visual world and correlate and compare those experiences in this ever-evolving contemporary context. We're pulling those things that we're thinking about forward, and then we're able to verbalize them. And that means that as speakers, we're evolving and exploring the language necessary to translate our visual experiences into communication that we can share with others, because really the only state we can share as humans is feelings. And how do we share those feelings but with words, speaking our emotions? And that takes practice. As writers, this means that through the process of crit culture, we can compose the words needed in service of the ideas that are being evoked in the art. We can synthesize the voices around the work in order to better communicate to those not present and expand the discussion that that art is provoking. And as artists, that we can earnestly listen for perspectives, both expected and unexpected, to understand better how we improve our communication with our viewers. And of course, so that we can gather and we can seek meaningful insights together, so that we strengthen communities, we strengthen our capabilities as viewers, as speakers, as writers, and as artists, and we gain a better awareness of how our work is impacting others. This, I believe, is really how we elevate art as a supreme form of visual language and communication. We have to be discussing art, and I want to make sure that you feel comfortable doing so. May all participating parties, whether they be viewers, speakers, writers, or artists, hone the faculties for sharing visual experiences, expand their engagements with artwork, gain a multitude of perspectives from others, vocalizing the same, and grow through this process. The only intent of crit is to be able to grow. Crit is not an instructional setting. It's not for people to say, you should have done it this way. Crit is not a combative discussion. It's not a place to say, I am right and you are wrong. Crit is not an interrogation of the artist. In fact, as you'll see, the artist really won't be responding to things that people say in a session of crit culture. In fact, as you'll see, the artist won't really be responding to what's said by viewers during a crit session. Crit is not a public speaking assignment. And this is interesting because I think a lot of people do use it as a public speaking assignment, where they'll set up a session where people basically volunteer to be the audience while the artist tries to field questions. That's not what we are going to do in our crit culture. Basically, crit is not about the artist. It's about the work and the viewer's experience with the work. The artist, instead of talking, instead of explaining their intentions, takes in the reception of their work as data. That reception of their work is data that they can then process and use to improve on their own arts practice. It's an ongoing practice of research. And the artist, so as not to skew the interpretations of the work, will shield their intentions for the work. Because obviously as the viewer, if you know what the artist is trying to do, you're more likely to try to see that. And that's not what's going to help the artist. What's going to help the artist is to understand what you honestly came to that work and experienced. it really doesn't matter what the artist would like the experience of the viewer to be. What matters is what the experience is to the viewer. The experience of the work is at the center of the discussion. And as such, crit protocol is as follows. 1, there's a describer. So you imagine you have a group of people, you have a set of art up, and somebody from that group will be selected to simply materially describe the work in front of them. This may seem really obvious, but it helps set a foundation for the rest of the discussion so that you don't have somebody saying, oh, I missed that was this material or this, that, or the other. Another important thing about this describer is they are only describing what is obviously present. So you're not bringing in a lot of other information. If the artist wants it to be understood, then the artist will have made it obvious, which means I may say there is a painting that is in a vertical rectangle on a wood panel. It appears to be oil painting, but I'm not going to say, and it seems to be something like a woman, I think the artist was trying to describe their mother, right? If the artist didn't put a description there that says the title is something about my mother, then it's not going to be relevant to the experience of the viewer at this point in the game. We are really just playing with what the artist wants to take in as data, which means the things that the artist put out is what's getting processed by the viewer. So you would say things that are very obvious. This sculpture is about 4 feet tall, made of metal, and seems to have sharp edges. Something very, very effective in simply visually describing what you see. Then the floor opens for the sharing of the introspective viewer experiences. So that means it's going to open to people commenting that, the amount of negative space in this is causing me to have a sense of lightness around the image, or something that starts to talk about each individual person's feelings and way of looking at the work. All experiences in this part are valid. You do not have to be an expert in anything to tell me about your experience. In fact, it's inherently your experience and you're the only expert of that. And that's why you're in a session speaking, and that's why anyone from the public can join in a crit session. No communication in this part is directed directly at the artist, in fact. All the comments are presented to the group for discussion, which means you're not standing there telling the artist, oh, you're making me feel this way. That would be pretty intimidating as the artist, right? The artist, rather, will be standing likely behind the group or somewhere off to the side where they can see the work and they can see the people discussing it, but they're not going to be front and center taking on these comments as something that they have to defend or rebuff. No comment is going to be assumed to be a consensus. So that means that just because Sally says a work of art makes her feel angry, it does not mean that Susie and Jim think that work of art makes them feel angry. And it's important to go ahead and voice those discrepancies whenever you're in front of a work in a crit session, because again, the artist is listening to hear how is this affecting people differently. To that service, no use of nondescript subjectives will be tolerated. This I'm a pretty big stickler on. What you like and don't like is of no service to me as the artist. It can't be debated. It could be set on so many different premises that as the artist, I have no idea if it's good that you like it or if it's terrible that you like it. So just leave it out. It's irrelevant. What you need to be describing instead of you like it is what you're feeling and how you think you're feeling it. Like, I am sensing an overwhelming joy from scrolling through this image, serpentining down past the leaves, past the kois, and swooping back around to the beautiful clouds. That will let me understand as an artist that you probably like this. But I understand further than that because I understand why you like it. Next is to think about the fact that speech is to be about first-hand experiences. Hypothetical understandings about so-and-so might interpret this differently than me, not the forum for that, because there are other so-and-sos in the room, and if they interpret it differently, they'll speak up and say so. That's what we're trying to form as community. So let's not have presumptive conversations that really can't help the artist solidly understand what their work is doing. Next, speech is about the first-hand experiences. Conjectures about hypotheticals and presumptive commentary about, well, if you change the color, then I would really feel better. Those don't have a great place in this setting because the color's not changed. And what the artist is really trying to gather is what this experience is, not what they could do. They probably already know a lot of the things that they could do. This was probably not their only idea. So keep your commentary focused on exactly what you are sensing out of the piece. And finally to remember in this part of the crit session is that conjectures about third-party hypotheticals are also not to be had. We're not going to talk about whether your mother in Honolulu would appreciate this work of art because she's not there, and chances are there's somebody else in the room that might have a perspective that's similar to hers, and really that's what we're seeking to have, are large crit discussions where you get lots of different people's understandings and experiences, a variety of perspective coming to a work that the artist can then take back and again apply to improving their communication styles. And then finally, after all of this great discussion is had, the session closes with the artist finally being able to speak a few words. And here the artist can protect their ego as much as they want. They can say things as simple as, "Thank you for coming and sharing." The artist doesn't owe anyone the need to explain their intentions or to let you know what they plan on doing next. This is data for the artist to go back and process, and they shouldn't be expected to be able to do that quickly and on the spot. Remember that the future of the work rests solely in the artist's hands. So to recap, crit culture holds that criticism is different from critical analysis of a matter of process, which is different from critical analysis of one's experience of an artwork, which means it's different to say this wood should have been sanded down more in order to properly form this joint, versus because this joint seems to be rough, I am getting the sense of speed here, and that's contributing to my experience of the work as being done in haste. Those are two qualitatively different sets of data. One presumes that you know how to woodwork better than the artist. The other lets the artist know that because this detail was done in this way, it had an effect on you. Crit culture holds that craft, process, and historical discussions about art can be obtained by artists under other circumstances than the crit session. Those discussions can be really important to have, but it's not necessary to have a public forum where everyone in the audience then perceives themselves to be instructing the artist in order to get that information. What we really want to have is that public forum where everyone in the audience feels valued and the artist feels like they are valued in wanting to gather this information. Crit culture requires that personal pedestals and all the platitudes be wholly disregarded. You are not better than the artist, the other viewer is not better than you, the artist is not better than you. Everyone is on level ground whenever they are speaking in a crit session. And finally, crit culture holds that the most useful critique for the artist is one that everyone is qualified to give. As artists, we put work out into the public, and if we don't know how the public is responding, we are at a disadvantage. Therefore, the most interesting and absolutely unattainable information that an artist can get from a crit session is insight into your experience as the viewer. I've gone ahead and prepared this manifesto around critical discussion in art as a document that you can sign onto so that when you participate in a crit session, You have accepted that these are important values to hold as a community in that session. The session becomes a kind of safe space where art is discussed in detail and in depth. And your internal experiences, those introspective insights, are shared raw and making vulnerable statements. When we participate in a crit session, we are holding that this is a vitally important thing for our community to stay healthy and for our art to expand and grow and be better able to reach out to new viewers and new areas, and that we believe in our arts culture and know that it can be even better. Thank you so much for sitting in on this presentation. I really hope that you'll take all of this information to heart and start practicing it with your friends, or come out to a crit culture session and sign on, be part of the voices raising up to make sure that we are getting our art ever better, and we're building stronger and stronger communities that want to have discussions around the work, that want to share their personal insights, rather than kind of shying away from the idea of crit because we think it's going to knock us down. That's not what crit should be about. And let's make sure that it's not about criticism, that it's about critical analysis and that introspective insight from a viewer to an artist that lets the artist blossom in their next endeavor. My name is Jennifer Wester. Thank you so much. Have a great day.